In 1901, Wilbur Wright said, "The secret of flight will not be mastered within our lifetime, not within 1,000 years." Just a few years later, he proved himself wrong when he and his brother achieved the first controlled and powered flight. So, what does that have to do with transhumanism? Transhumanism is the idea that science and technology can help humans develop beyond their current physical and mental limitations. In other words, transhumanists strive for things that seem impossible today and to many may never be possible. Consequently, transhumanism challenges the idea that the human condition is fixed and unchangeable. Instead, it argues that we can and should question and improve it. Therefore, many transhumanists aim to transition into a post-human state, which far exceeds the intelligence and capabilities of any human today. According to transhumanists, this post-human stage could include reaching intellectual heights far above any current human genius, becoming resistant to disease, staying young forever and eliminating aging, and gaining control over their own desires, moods, and mental states. Achieving this posthuman state may sound like science fiction, but there are people actively working toward it. This is the core of the transhumanist movement. While Julian Huxley is often considered the first transhumanist for introducing the term in 1951 to describe humanity's potential to overcome its limitations, Max More claims to have used the term in a more modern sense in 1990. He also played a key role in shaping transhumanism as a movement. Natasha Vitamore is the CEO of Humanity Plus. Her research focuses on life extension. Together, Max More and Natasha Vitamore form a prominent couple in the transhumanist community. They published The Transhumanist Reader and have had a significant influence on the movement. The Swedish philosopher Nick Bostrom is known for his work on bioethics and superintelligence. He is a co-founder of the World Transhumanist Association, today called Humanity Plus, an organization you will get to know now. Humanity Plus promotes the idea we want people to be better than well by using technology and evidence-based science. They focus on key transhumanist characteristics such as longevity, advances in AI, and the future of humanity. Founded in 1998 by Nick Bostrom and David Pierce, it was originally known as World Transhumanist Association. The organization also established a Transhumanist Declaration, which outlines the core beliefs and goals of the movement that you already know. Transhumanist ideas have also made their way into politics. The United States Transhumanist Party is built on key principles such as significantly extending human life, fostering a society driven by reason, science, and secular values, and eliminating existential risks to the human species. According to the party, it reached 1,000 members in 2018. The party also developed the Transhumanist Bill of Rights, which extends its meanings beyond humans to include future forms of life, such as cyborgs, digital intelligence, and intellectually enhanced, previously non-sapient animals. However, we can also find transhumanistic features in German politics. The Transhumanist Party Germany advocates for similar ideas and values, guided by the motto, commitment to progress. So, all of that sounds promising, right? But what about the criticism of transhumanism? Criticism of transhumanism can be divided into different categories. Some critics challenge its philosophy on technological, religious, or social grounds. Examining the technological aspect of criticism, many argue that the intentions of transhumanists are unrealistic and unfeasible, as they are scientifically implausible. Richard Ale Jones is one of them. He's a British physicist who explores the question of whether transhumanist technologies are possible. He primarily criticizes transhumanism based on technological aspects, particularly in relation to longevity and the idea of uploading a human mind into a computer. He argues that the foundation of many transhumanists' ideas relies on advanced nanotechnology. In this context, he points out that the book Nanosystems by Eric Drexler, which outlines the theoretical foundations of molecular nanotechnology, was published in 1992. Yet since then, only little progress has been made. Therefore, he believes that humanity is still far from experiencing the kind of exponential technological growth that transhumanists envision. So the question is, if the foundation of transhumanist ideas doesn't even fully exist yet, how can their visions be considered realistic? Transhumanists aim to extend human life indefinitely. Concerning this goal, Jones highlights a critical problem. So far, humanity still does not fully understand disease like Alzheimer or create working therapies for such neurodegenerative disease. Therefore, he argues, how we can think about extending life when we haven't even solved such devastating illnesses. In general, life extension would depend on breakthroughs in medical nanotechnology, which for him face major scientific challenges. Another aspect Jones criticizes deeply is the aim to upload a human mind into a computer. Up to today, brain mapping can only be done when it's dead, and even then, it cannot be fully mapped out. As a physicist, he considers the idea scientifically implausible and believes it is nothing that can be achieved in the future. Looking at the bigger picture, he also warns about resource limitations, a factor transhumanists often ignore. He argues that the current period of technological growth is temporary and that a lack of resources will eventually slow it down. So it's pretty unlikely that technological growth will keep going at this pace. While Jones is highly skeptical of transhumanist predictions, he also acknowledges a possible counterargument. Remember the quote from the beginning of the video? He notes that many years ago people believed that humanity would never be able to fly. Yet today, air travel is not only a reality, but accessible to almost everyone. So why shouldn't it be the same with transhumanist ideas? Well, he weakens this argument by highlighting a contradiction. Many transhumanists claim that the technologies needed for their visions already exist. If that were true, Jones argues, why haven't we seen any significant breakthroughs yet? In sum, while transhumanists envision immortality and digital consciousness, Jones reminds us that science requires more than wishful thinking. We must first overcome current technological limits. So let's take a look at how transhumanism is viewed and criticized from a religious point of view. The Christian mentality and the transhumanist view of life are profoundly different. According to Christian belief, humanity and the world with its limitations, including disease, violence, suffering, and even death, is fundamentally good and part of God's creation. In contrast, transhumanists see the world, including humanity, as flawed and something that must be changed, overcome, and transcended. Two of the strongest religious critics are that transhumanism is a sort of playing God and that the ideology is violating God's will. But what does that mean in practice? The critic Francis Fukuyama, an American writer and political theorist with a focus on biotechnological developments, argues that the key difference between human and non human creation lies in our capacity for moral choice, faith, and free will. Christians believe that these are characteristics given by God. In this context, the question arises if future forms of life, envisioned by transhumanists, will have these characteristics as well. In addition, Manitza Kotze, who is a researcher in the field of biotechnology and its challenges for Christianity, argues that with these characteristics, all humans are created equal in the image of God, a belief that implies fundamental equality and worth of every person. He or she warns that this could be threatened by transhumanist ideas such as life extension. For example, Kotze argues that the Christian confession includes the freedom of life and the core belief that there is no control of the beginning and ending of it. Should transhumanists extend life radically, this core belief of Christianity would be violated. Another argument made by Fukuyama is that God created human beings through natural processes, which include reproduction through sex and the traditional family structure. Biomedical technologies such as birth control, in vitro fertilization, stem cell research, and genetic engineering allow reproduction to take place outside of this natural process. In this way, humans assume a godlike role in the creation of life. However, it is important to note that some of these technologies are already in use today, which raises the question of whether humanity has already begun to violate what some consider to be God's will. These religious concerns raise important ethical questions. However, not everyone agrees with this line of criticism. Supporters of transhumanism might argue that the playing God argument overlooks the fact that God's creation can also be brutal, terrifying, and deadly. According to this argument, it would be morally wrong to cure cancer, limit the spread of HIV, or even use condoms. Furthermore, if one assumes there is a God, isn't it very presumptuous to claim to know the mind of God? And maybe it's the transhumanists who are actually fulfilling God's plan. Finally, Kotze makes a point I personally agree with. She suggests that transhumanists should focus on treating age related disease rather than extending life radically. This way, people could enjoy more years of good health and quality of life before they die. However, I also think Fukuyama is right when he says that religious arguments in general won't be persuasive to those who do not believe in religion. So let's see what else is there to criticize. When we look at social criticism of transhumanism, we mainly focus on Francis Fukuyama, whom we've already discussed, and Leon Kass. Kass holds a medical degree and a doctorate in biochemistry and has written extensively on bioethics, particularly on issues like cloning and genetic modification. The first question that arises when discussing this aspect of criticism is whether enhancing the human species is safe. Leon Kass acknowledges that biotechnology itself isn't inherently bad, because after all, it has led to incredible medical advancements. However, he warns that the goals of transhumanists extend beyond curing disease. The issue, he argues, is that the human body is a highly complex system. Biotechnological tools were initially developed to treat illness, not to enhance humans beyond their natural abilities. Once we start modifying what it means to be human, we risk unforeseen, potentially dangerous consequences. Francis Fukuyama shares this concern and references an experiment in which a mouse, whose intelligence was genetically improved, felt greater pain than before, a troubling side effect. Cass recognizes that people may willingly take risks to enhance their bodies, though he argues that no one should gamble with their basic health for self improvement. Another danger occurs when it comes to the idea of life extension. Fukuyama argues that if older generations remain in position of power, it could hinder younger people from advancing in age-based hierarchies. Additionally, he points out that the growing need for elderly care is already beginning to take priority over childcare, a trend that would only intensify in a transhumanistic world. But there are more concerns when we look at social criticism. In my view, one of the most important issues is the question of social inequality. In Fukuyama's work Transhumanism, he discusses how the US Declaration of Independence states that all men are created equal, and that simply being human grants individuals political and legal equality. However, he argues that this equality is tied to what he calls the human essence, traits such as skin color, beauty, and intelligence. In this context, transhumanists seek to change this essence by enhancing or modifying these traits. For Fukuyama, the key question becomes what kind of rights will enhanced humans, or as he calls them, creatures, possess? And equally important, what will happen to those left behind in a world where human enhancement becomes widespread? Leon Kass shares Fukuyama's concerns and offers a concrete example. He argues that enhanced biotechnologies could create unfair advantages among humans. Enhancements such as brain implants or genetically boosted muscle mass wouldn't only affect competitive activities, but could also disrupt fairness in everyday life. As a result, the gap in opportunity between enhanced and non enhanced humans would grow, ultimately undermining the very concept of equality itself. But this raises another question. Is it even valid to debate whether human enhancement will be inaccessible to some? Or is that discussion irrelevant if we assume that access will be granted to all? Leon Kass explores this question and whether it will depend on financial means. On the Humanity Plus website, it is argued that the typical pattern of new technologies becoming cheaper over time will also apply to transhumanistic goals. However, as with many technologies today, individuals with fewer financial resources often only have access to cheaper or outdated technologies. Therefore, it is reasonable to expect that the gap between rich and poor will increase further if transhumanist ideas are put into practice. Here, Cass also provides an example that highlights the complexity of the issue. Imagine parents have the ability to add certain genes or characteristics to their baby. Beyond the risk of creating a more homogenized society, this scenario also raises the question of whether it would be considered child neglect if parents were unable or chose not to provide such enhancements for their child. To sum it up, social criticism of transhumanism highlights not only the potential dangers on an individual level, but also the broader risk for society as a whole. The possibility of a divided society, whether through age based hierarchies or a widening gap between rich and poor, is a realistic and pressing concern. After exploring all these different perspectives, from critics to supports, you might be interested in where I stand in all of this. When it comes to the technological criticism of transhumanism, I don't feel qualified to make a final judgment about whether transhumanist goals are truly achievable. That said, I remain skeptical about the feasibility of radical life extension and especially the idea of mind uploading. These still seem very far from reality. Instead of chasing such distant visions, I believe biotechnology should focus on treating disease and enabling people to live full and healthy lives, free from unnecessary suffering. Although I'm not religious myself, and religious criticism therefore plays a smaller role in shaping my view, I can absolutely understand why people of faith would raise the concerns discussed in this video. However, the most important and convincing criticism to me lies in the social implications of transhumanism. I firmly believe that the goals of this movement will not be equally accessible to everyone, regardless of financial status. On the contrary, the gap between rich and poor will likely grow even larger. In general, there are still far too many unanswered questions, many of which simply cannot be answered yet because most of the visions promoted by transhumanists are still far away from our current reality. That's why I approach this topic with a great deal of skepticism. So, what do you think? Which form of criticism is most convincing to you? Would you want to live in a biotechnological enhanced world where you could be part of an elite? And more importantly, would you want to live in such a world if you didn't have access to enhancements while most others did? Write it down in the comments. Thanks for watching!